It's working. I see chairs being pulled out. That's a very good sign. And I'll wait for that. And we'll start in a minute. There are also still some free seats in the middle if you want to squeeze in. There's an unlimited number of chairs in the back. So welcome everybody. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you to today's event. My name is Katharina Gnad, and I'm responsible for the work at the Bertelsmann Stiftung that deals with the European economy. First of all, I would like to thank CEPS, in particular Cinzia Alcidi, for joining forces with us in presenting this study here in Brussels. We really appreciate it, and I think this is sort of the beginning, let's see, to sort of talk more, I put it sort of diplomatically, talk more about the future of cohesion in the upcoming months and years. So this study that we are presenting today, and you see a sort of screen and you see all the co-authors who are all here today, and I'm very happy that you all made the way from different places in the world to Brussels today. So what is this study all about? Professor Pierre-Alexandre Vaillant from Utrecht University and the Artificial and Natural Intelligence Toulouse Institute, it's quite a mouthful, he's one of the co-authors, and he will talk through the study in a second. So he will tell you much more about what it is, what we found out, what the policy implications might be. Before we then discuss it with you in the audience, but also with an excellent panel that is chaired by Cinzia Alcidi in a second. But let me tell you a little bit about the motivation of this study very briefly. We at the Bertelsmann Foundation started thinking about the future of European cohesion and regional economic development in earnest about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And we have done a lot of work on sort of trying to find out, sort of doing studies on the future of the European economy and on cohesion and cohesiveness of the EU. However, we realized pretty early on in this project that these new mega trends of greening the economy, of digitizing the European economy, pose a huge challenge to all our lives, but also to Europe's economy as a whole. It has a deep impact not only on how in Europe, in the EU together, we face competition at the global level, but it also has a deep impact on the regional level and the local economy. It has an impact of how we produce value at the local level, but it also has a deep impact on how we as Europeans in our regions, in our countries, perceive this twin transition and what Europe in effect does for us in order to master this twin transition. So what this study focuses on is the technology-induced opportunities for European regions to both shape the twin transition, but also to participate in its benefits. So what that means for this prospect is, first of all, a question of what it means for the regions, but it also has a big impact on how it has a big impact on how Europe as a whole is cohesive or non-cohesive at the end of it. So what interests us at the end of the day is whether this twin transition and adopting the technologies, producing these technologies will make Europe more equal or more unequal when it comes to their opportunities. So without further ado, I would leave the floor to Pierre-Alex to present the study, and I look forward to the discussion. And you can already start thinking about some questions because there will be time for questions and answers. And at the end of the event, there will also be a short reception to which you're all very welcome as well. So the floor is yours, Pierre-Alex.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for the nice introduction. So let me tell you that it's a huge challenge to summarize this study. You have a copy here, I don't know, maybe 100 pages, huge challenge, especially if you ask an academic, you know, we tend to go really over time, but I will try to give it a shot. So, can we please start a deck? Okay, fantastic. So what we do, basically, we look at the geography of the twin transition. So we basically start and try to understand this question from the technology angle. So we're not talking about technology adoption here. We're really talking about technology creation. And that's something which is really important because the green market and the digital market will be huge in the future. And if we also want to shape the way we do AI, the way we do green technology, it's really important that European regions take a lead here. So we have this tech angle. And the first thing that we found, looking at basically the geography of technological capabilities in Europe, if you look at the map behind me, and this shows basically, you know, whether European regions have more tendency to be really, really good at digital technologies in blue or green technologies in green. What you see here is that we don't have countries. You know, I challenge anyone to find country borders here. It's really looking at technological capabilities in the twin transition is really a regional issue. A regional perspective is very much needed. The second thing that you see is that we have a very strong heterogeneity of capabilities. So if you look at the level of green digital, you already have a lot of heterogeneity, but in the study, we go at a very granular level and looking at different type of technologies. We look at wind energy, we look at AI, blockchain, we look at broadband, we look at 5G, we look at very granular level of technologies, and we find huge heterogeneity. And the challenge to actually accelerate the twin transition in Europe is to build smartly on these capabilities and acknowledge that European regions have diverse set of strengths and capability. And that's something we go very deep in the report, so you can find more information. What we do is we map these capabilities internally, but we also look at the potential for region to connect better to create new technologies. So we look at the internal capabilities and in a way the external potential for better collaboration. And the key message of the study is that there is no really other choice, but there is no one size fits all. We have to build on this diversity of strengths. We have to map it and to build on this diversity of strengths to actually fully accelerate the twin transition. Now, first warning that we find in this study is a very strong risk of actually increasing regional inequality with the twin during the area of the twin transition. So on the left-hand side, you have in blue the potential to lead the twin transition in digital technology, and on the right-hand side, you have the potential to lead the twin transition from a green perspective. And what you see here is very strong concentration of these capabilities and this potential in Europe, in some European region. We have a much stronger potential, actually, a much stronger concentration of capabilities for the digital technologies than for the green one. But essentially, a big issue here, if you look at opportunities, so this graph tells you a story of how related different type of technologies, and here you have a little bit of an idea of the level of granularity that we have. So for instance, we look at biocide, advanced materials, smart farming, solar energy, virtual reality, big data, Internet of Things. And we have a framework here where we measure relatedness, so for the more advanced regions, for the more developed regions in Europe, and complexity of the technologies. So we look at how these technologies basically fit the existing ecosystem of the more developed regions. Okay, so looking at the more transition and less framework of the cohesion policy, what we see here is that these technologies that are at the same time highly complex tend to be very related to the existing ecosystem of the regions that are the most advanced in terms of economic development in Europe. What does that mean? That means that the regions that will lead in these technologies, they tend to be very highly concentrated in already the very rich and developed region. So that's an issue. So we have this kind of relationship here where the most complex technologies, the ones that have the most potential for growth, they tend to be concentrated in the regions that already have a lot of potential. When we look at now the transition regions, so that was for the more, right, developed region. And then if you look at the transition regions here, what we see is kind of a different type of pattern, where these most complex technologies, the one that can help you to capture a lot of value added, they are not very much related to the internal capacity of the region that are in transition, right? And that's an issue. And if we look at the less developed regions, what you see here is that actually that was something pretty interesting that we didn't expect, but there is a little bit more of movement of these complex technologies, so that they are the ones that have the most potential. There's a bit of a movement here, which means they tend to be a little bit more related to what is actually being performed in the region. And why is that useful? Because these are the technologies that have the most potential for growth. And especially some technologies related to big data, IoT, AI, cloud computing, they tend to be quite related to the existing infrastructure and technologies in the less developed regions. So essentially what it means is that, to make it very clear, is that we have to be very careful that during the twin transition, we don't also accelerate inequality between regions. And to avoid this issue, what we can do is actually to build on existing capacity of regions, to make sure we develop the technologies that best fit the regional ecosystems. Otherwise, essentially, we will run into trouble. So this is, for instance, for Oberbayern, and you see that the most related and complex technologies are here in this quadrant. For another region, which is a region in transition here, for the region of Centre, you have less of this capacity, but you have this frontier here where you see battery technology, for instance, drones, that are basically the technologies that will offer the best potential for the region to develop. So that was the first idea. We have to be very careful that we don't increase regional inequality during the twin transition. Now, the second finding of the study that we want to emphasize right now is that there is a strong national bias in interregional collaboration. So we know that, but the extent to which this bias exists is extremely strong in the twin transition. So if we look at connections, here, these are the within-country connection in red, and in orange, the cross-country connection. You see a completely, overarching, pattern where regions in Europe tend really to collaborate based on the national border. And connections, if you try to model that, can be explained mainly by spatial distance. So that's, something to be expected. The size of innovative activity, cognitive profile, but especially being in the same country. And essentially being in the same country, is 3 times as important as the size of innovative activity, which is something which is really a problem. And this pattern that we see here of having way too much collaboration within region basically does not match the existing map of capabilities. If you look at the map of capabilities in the first graph, you don't see countries, you don't see borders, but you see borders in the way region collaborate. So this is for digital technologies here. In the case of green technologies, the impact is even stronger, so you see even more red essentially. And the big question here is which connection needs to be targeted in priority. So what we find is a very strong mismatch between the actual linkages, the actual networks that you see between region, and the map of capabilities. So here, this is for the region of Arnsberg in the context of hydrogen. And you see here the complementarity potential of this region, which is here in red, with every other region in Europe. And what you see, very strong complementarity potential, for instance, with Rhône-Alpes, which is in France. But if you look at the actual network of collaboration, you don't see this connection anymore. So this is, if you want, somehow of an idealized, regional system of innovation, and the actual one, basically doesn't match. And this mismatch is a big problem if you want to scale capabilities for especially very complex technologies. So what we do, based on this analysis, we compute untapped potential. In this case, also accounting for other variables that are important, like for instance, size of the different economies, And essentially what we compute here is what this network will look like in the ideal world if you will not have this, overemphasis of country, within country collaboration. So we study that, and you see basically the maps of the ideal network. They look very different from what the real network is. And the green one, in the green technologies, we see a little bit of movement toward the south. Okay, so this is it for the presentation. I have a summary slide here that I won't really discuss too much, but essentially you have here the finding of the study, 3 findings, and essentially policy implication. So I'm just going to read the policy implication really quick. No one-size-fits-all policy from both a regional and technological standpoint. We need to support a technological prioritization. This is really important. Effort of less developed regions, so we can map capabilities and help decide, basically where to invest. And this is the way, to basically avoid this increasing inequality. And we need to target untapped potential to improve both the global EU leadership and EU cohesion. Thank you so much.
So good afternoon, everyone, and very welcome to this event also from my side. I'm Cinzia Cidi, I'm the Director of Research here at CEPS, and I'm really pleased to moderate this excellent panel. After the super interesting presentation made by Pierre-Alexandre, many thanks. I have a lot of questions in mind, so a lot of food for thoughts, no doubt about that. But I'll retain my questions, and first of all, I want to introduce the panelists. I will start on my left with Ron Boschma from University of Utrecht, and one of the authors of this report. Then next to him, Peter Berskovic is a director at the DG Regio, so Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy at the European Commission. And then last but not least, Thomas Woben is Director for Legislative Work at the Committee of the Regions. So welcome to all of you, and many thanks for joining us. I'll go straight to the point with some questions so that we also have the time to get questions from the audience. And I would like to start with Peter. Peter, one of the main slogans of the Commission is "No one left behind." And I think this is particularly important when we speak about the twin transition, also in the light of what it was said just a few minutes ago, and the fact that the twin transition in practice could increase the risk of inequalities at regional level. So the question is, how can we make sure that no one is left behind? And more specifically linked to what we just heard is interregional cooperation or smart specialization the kind of answers that we can offer to basically mitigate or reduce this risk? Floor is yours.
Right. Well, first of all, delighted to be here together with Ron, Thomas, and other colleagues. Just to answer your question, I mean, I think it's absolutely clear, like any other major technological shocks, that what we see here will lead potentially to significant inequalities through the asymmetric impact that it's going to have. And this is something which we're already looking at in the Commission. I think what's really important about this piece of work is it brings a message that there are also opportunities. And I think that that is the key policy issue, as you seem to allude to. And the question is whether the instruments we have at the moment are completely adequate to address these. And I think that, you mentioned some of the instruments we have within cohesion policy. We have smart specialization, but smart specialization has traditionally remained very inward-looking. I think we saw in Pierre-Alex's maps the national focus, but often we even see a very strong regional focus. So the question of how you create linkages outside region are posed. We have a new instrument, which is the I3 instrument, which is focused on trying to build complementarities, but it's a very, very small amount of money, 570 million euros. So I think the real question is, how would we scale up tools in the future in order to build on the potential? I think we have to move away from a compensatory logic. It remains very, very important, but to something that actually builds on the potential of all the regions. And what I found very, very interesting from the presentation was it shows very, very clearly that different types of regions have different potentials in different areas and potential relative advantages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like now to move to Thomas and link to the issue of interregional cooperation and the fact that basically what it was shown in the chart is that this is essentially national. It's clearly not optimal, but it's clearly national. How do you think, I mean, what could be the way to go beyond the national border, if you think it's possible?
Yeah, first of all, thanks having us here today. Is also we discussed in the committee the future of cohesion, future of transition, and we're very happy to be here. I speak on my own behalf because we haven't had a new position yet, but work very closely with a lot of people. Yeah, we have a paradox. On the one hand, those who are most in need to be able to cherish the opportunities, don't do it. We have an innovation paradox. The most who are most in need are the least who take up the opportunities. And in the study, for example, there's a reference also to the locked-in regions. And there was a case made for Northern Westphalia, for the Ruhr area, 20 years ago. And I think a lot of that is still the same now. If you only focus on within, and even within the region, within the country, if your cluster or your industry is only inward looking itself, it's very difficult to see what the challenges in the future are. And very often those who are dealing with interregional are the experts in administrations, and they are seen as something as an add-on, not as an integral part to execute. And we do not have a culture where we really embed interregional cooperation, outward-looking, as part of our policy making, particularly also in the administrative space. For example, the European Commission is planning a communication on the European administrative space later this year. And my point would be, cohesion policy is a huge administrative space in the European Union. We need to link administration and cooperation much more in order to make the internal market, the common market, really working for each of the regions. And the big problem we have, and Peter has said so, we have winners and losers in the transition. A lot of the citizens perceive this coming from Brussels. We have next year a European election. We have seen recent election that people are not that happy with the speed and the changes, and there is too little focus on local solutions based on cooperation. And this program Peter was referring to is very important, but it's very difficult to really engage in it if there is not local leadership ready for it. And we do not have enough local leaders, particularly in lagging behind regions, who want to bridge this and who want to use it, use this space of opportunities. They see it more as a space of challenges and threats to them. And that is the key issue we have also in how to manage the twin transition, because we have to consolidate it in the next years in order to make it a success. Because it's seen in many regions, particularly in lagging behind regions, as a threat, and cooperation needs to be an essential part of it. But it isn't yet. It isn't yet. We haven't found the formula really to get regions cooperating in this way. And maybe the last sentence, the map is a bit misleading because it's on a NUTS 2 level. You look at certain technologies. My assumption is any region can cooperate with any regions if they want to, because in many cases they can also find new space and new markets. But of course, you have relatedness, you have complexity as key drivers, as success factors, but it's also more outward looking as a general curiosity of the region to see what's outside. I would say is also an important factor, and it's a very personal factor. And lagging behind regions very often do not have business leaders who look outside. They are only implementing what some others have told them to do. And very often also the political culture is very much focused on a defensive way of seeing things and not in a way of opportunity.
Thanks a lot. If you allow me, just a quick follow-up. I mean, I have been around in Brussels for more than a decade, and I have been working on different policy areas. And basically, what we are discussing today is somehow some sort of national bias. So in the linkages, also across regions, there is some form of national bias. This is something that we observe also in other areas, from financial markets to many different policy areas. So there is always the questions, what are the obstacles? So why is that? And usually, as an economist, you said, well, it depends on the specific aspect at which you are looking at, and you range from language to the knowledge of the institutional setting, the fact that you have cooperated with another region in the same country in the past, and you try to there is basically some sort of inertia which keeps the same relations with the same partners. So how can we overcome this? Which basically here the message is this is not necessarily efficient in terms of network that you build, but how to get beyond that. And what you mentioned, this administrative space, because very often is also linked to administrative burden or administrative complexity of going in another country. I really wonder how concretely we could leverage on these new measures to go beyond the borders. Do you think it's something that it can really work, or it's more just the usual blah blah? Sorry to be so explicit on this. Thomas, I don't know whether you have...
sorry, you asked... no, of course it happens. And we have fantastic examples where regions get together, develop an idea and a project. But when you look at the triggers, what are these triggers for cooperation? You mentioned there is no one size fits all. There is not one way to do. Of course, one key trigger is funding. And that's where, for example, European Union plays a key role, bringing partners together on working. But we have to make the funding in a way that it is not too risky to do. For example, if you have a 1 to 10 chance of winning a cooperation project, you will not apply for really very important project for you, because the chance to fail is so high that you are not doing it. So what you do as cooperation projects is projects where you say, okay, nice to have, but not really essential things. So we would need to rethink the way how we trigger cooperation, also from the way of experimentation, from the way we deal with it. When we look at state aid, we will deal with it. We have the IPCAs, the projects of European interest. We have to get more these kind of instruments in the connection to regions lagging behind. And then, of course, knowledge. A lot of the regions do not know what their position and their threats are. And I think your study, the study, is very useful for seeing opportunities, but also in the other way, in the other direction where your threats are. And I think that's where we collectively have to think of new ways of working. And as I said, the European administration space, if you think it through, if, for example, you could think that in a region you have as a norm also people from other regions to work together with you. You balance cultures, you bring in other networks. If that becomes the norm as a part of a training program and so on, we can also overcome this locked-inness of many of the regions, and we call it now, the new term is development traps, as Ron, you mentioned it. We have for everything new terms, but there we really have to, and we have to strengthen local leadership. And when we look at the twin transition, it is not based on local leadership. The twin transition comes very much with, we have a joint objective, we make it legislation and so forth, and now we discover that there are big differences in regions. We have in this, and that's what I mean with consolidation of the Green Deal, we have to build it on local solutions. If we don't do, the voters will tell us what they think about it. And local solutions needs to be based on local abilities to do, and our help to help them to find these local solutions. Smart specialization is one way, but it's also peer-to-peer learning, more direct cooperation. And there's also one area which I find very important. We have multinationals, we have, for example, the chemical industry, you have big players there. They don't do enough to bring regions together. A BASF has sites in almost all European countries, but it treats each site as a competitor within the organization, and it doesn't use the network to bring the regions together. And I think that we have to overcome as well. If we want to have more partners to work together, we have to go back from the islands, and the islands of competition, the islands of, and more to strategic cooperation in this field. And that is unfortunately not happening enough.
Thanks a lot for this. I would like now to move to Ron, still related to this issue of cooperation. So it was mentioned that funds could be an incentive for cooperation. This may be an incentive for poorer regions, but what would be a good incentive for more developed regions actually to cooperate with those lagging behind?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all being here and giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel. Yes, what is the incentive of more developed regions to connect to other regions? Well, I think the study is very clear on that, is that there is a lot of misalignment going on, and that is also true for more developed regions, right? So that came as maybe as a bit of a surprise, but we can see overall that the regions make the wrong type of connections, right? So they might connect, but not to the ones that can provide complementary capabilities. And this, I think, is an issue, and therefore an issue also for more developed regions to take up. So they could get much more out of their innovation process if they would connect to the ones that can actually mean something to them, and somehow they are not able to do that. So this is comes very clear of our research. So there's a lot of untapped potential, as we refer to it, right? So and this is something which needs to be corrected, because what to me the European Union is about is to explore and exploit complementarities that exist across regions and countries within Europe, right? And apparently we are not doing that, or we're doing that only to a very limited extent. So yes, to expose to the outside world, that has often been referred to, that we should do that. But what this study actually shows is that it is not just exposure by itself, but that it matters to whom you link and who can provide the complementarities that you need in order to develop new innovations that you target, for example, in your smart specialization policy. Also, coming back to previous comments, a smart specialization policy already from its very beginning, starting in 2014, in their guidelines, there was already a requirement that they should focus on interregional linkages and they should exploit that. And that has not been really taken up in smart specialization policy. Yeah? The regions were more focusing on local capabilities and to depart from that and to see to what extent there are opportunities to diversify and to move into new economic activities. But to link to other regions was not really an issue. And what our study shows that it is maybe not so much connecting to somebody, but connecting to the right ones that can actually matter to you. So there's a very strong incentive for the more developed regions to do so, but we can actually see that they also have a lot of untapped potential, not connecting to the right ones. But that might be even more true for less developed regions, because they might have weaker capabilities, and therefore they might rely more on interregional linkages. But then again, the same issue, they have to connect to the ones that can actually matter to them. Right, so, and actually what we saw, and that came a bit of a surprise, I must say, is that less developed regions do so to a higher extent, relatively speaking, right? So, and that, I think that is already a good starting point, so that they are aware of making connections outside their own regions. But then there is still the issue is, do they connect to the right ones? And that is what we observe is not really happening. And this is really something which I find really disturbing in our European Union, right? So the whole European Union, again, is about integration and exploiting opportunities that are around in different countries within the European Union. And that means you have to connect to each other, and you have to tap in knowledge that you don't have yourself. And this is not actually what is happening too much, despite the fact that we have Horizon collaborative research programs. So I think also, we talked already about what kind of policy measures could we think of. Well, this is something to start with, right? So if we develop Horizon 20 programs, partners, organizations can come up with proposals, and they form a consortium. But then the issue is, who will be part of that consortium? Are there partners that can really provide complementary capabilities? So should that not be a requirement before you get funding in Horizon programs? Because you can connect, you come up with a consortium, and you link to partners that you had a previous ties with in the past, right? Because this is, of course, what we know happens. This is also true in science. So researchers tend to collaborate with the ones they collaborate with in the past. But that might not be a collaboration that really leads to something new. Because at some point of time you know each other and you don't add so many new insights in this collaboration process. So what we can do, and this is, and we could make that an important criterion for our Horizon programs in the future, is that we actually select those partners, and we only support those proposals that can actually show that the partners are well chosen, that can provide the complementary capabilities in order to make those consortium, research consortia successful. So that is something what
Thanks a lot. I like quite a lot your example of the Horizon consortia. But let me go back to Peter. So tomorrow the Commission will host an event, the Just Transition Platform Conference starts. We know that there are some regions who are going to face a difficult transition. What do you think, what kind of message can come up from this discussion, which could be constructive for the stakeholders which will come to the conference, if you think that there is a good message to deliver?
Well, when I reflect on the Just Transition Fund and the Just Transition Platform and the regions that are covered by it, I think the main challenge for most of the regions is one of diversification. They've become locked into certain types of technology, certain types of energy systems, certain types of production systems. And I think the type of analysis which is presented in this piece of work is very, very useful for these regions to understand where their potential lies. And I think the first thing is to actually understand what their real potential is, as opposed to the potential that they may think they have on the basis of political processes or what is fashionable. And I think this is the first condition. I think the second condition is, and I think it's already been mentioned several times, this issue of capabilities. That without capabilities, you cannot leverage this knowledge. And this is particularly the case in less developed regions. And it's capabilities in quite a broad sense of the word. It's the abilities of firms to understand the opportunities. It's the public administration's ability to project itself both within the region and outside the region. But also, and I think this is something which hasn't really been said yet, but I think in policy terms is essential, is the capacity to mobilize external knowledge, whether it comes from the private sector, from multinationals, from EU programs. And in this respect, I think, and Ron mentioned it, EU programs are very important. I mean, we have cohesion policy, which is essentially a funding mechanism, comes with a bit of a few mechanisms, but we have other big policies. We have We have Horizon, but we also have all the single market policies, we have digital policies, we have environment and climate policies. What people tend to forget is that if you look at the climate area, we have the innovation and the modernization funds. There are lots of different policies out there. So I think this reflection has to go beyond cohesion policy. And perhaps just one additional element which really supports this is that we are living in a changing industrial policy landscape. In a few weeks, months, the Commission will make a proposal on a sovereignty fund, which will be designed precisely to strengthen production capabilities of key technologies, the kind of technologies that you are pointing to here. And there, the question will be whether in the construction of this new mechanism, there will be something which takes into account the possibility of less developed regions to play their part as well. And I think that's one of the discussions which is ongoing in the Commission at the moment.
Thanks a lot. Building on this and the different policy instruments and the funds that are available, I mean, of course, cohesion is one. So I would like to move back to Thomas. How can we keep cohesion policy relevant? This is okay. This is a quite broad question, but I think we were really speaking about the twin transition, so digitalization, so innovation, so very much forward-looking. How can we make cohesion still relevant?
I first clearly define what challenge we have. And the challenge we have is that we have a huge modernization happening, the twin transition, and we have collectively no clue what it means for each of the regions. We have 6, 7 big industries transforming at the same time, and nobody knows, is it building on each other? Is it counterproductive? And so forth. Nobody knows. When Commissioner Breton was asked in the high-level group, or in the Route 35 working group on the phasing out of the diesel, and I don't want to go into that deal, he said, I don't know if it works, but we have to do it. And that is the big problem. So we have to do a transition where we do not have the recipe in Brussels how it will work for each of the regions. And we have to build on local solutions. What we have is an explosion of instruments. We have the Social Climate Fund, we get the Sovereignty Fund, we get Modernization Fund, we have Cohesion, we have RFF, and so on. And that is a disaster because the regions lose completely the oversight. Am I on the right way? Do I use the right instrument? Do I have to please these people? Do I have to speak this language and that language? Because also we do not have one understanding, one joint understanding, how to deal with the regions. Ron, you spoke about opportunities. If we want to release the opportunity, we have to trust the regions. We have to have one understanding how we work with the regions, and that is lacking. And the second is we have every 7 years 1 year where we have all the money in the world, where we need ideas, and once we've written our programs, we have no money at all, and everything is in procedures. We know already now when we have this year where we have all the money in the world and where we need ideas. What do we do now to prepare that? We need now to prepare the regions for this consolidation of the Green Deal, that we have the concepts in place when the next generation of the policies come. And we need to consolidate them. To multiply these instruments is not the solution. It is a weakness of the coordination, the lack of coordination at European level. And the second point is very important. State aid has been fundamentally relaxed at the moment. We have all these instruments coming in. We have member states blocking final decisions at the very final stage. All signals that our system is under a tremendous tension. These kind of actions you don't do easily. And this tension we have to translate into clear ideas how we proceed. Because if not, then cohesion policy needs strong competition policy. If competition policy is suddenly being totally put on the market, it will have an impact on those lagging behind. So what it shows, we need a fundamental rethink how this transition agenda, which is, there is no alternative to this transition agenda, is being connected to the regions. We have this big mission approach where we say our mission is to be climate neutral 2035, but we have not understood, and that is not in the philosophy so far, how to build the ownership on the ground, that it is really been seen as the mission of the region, of the mayors. The mayors very often seen as victims. They are not seen as actors. And if they are not acting, then they are not the first line of defense. Why is Europe doing it? And that is where and that you can only do with cohesion. With the principle of multi-level governance, with partnership, with a shared management approach, shared responsible approach. And so my point would be, rather strengthen the policy than creating all these different funds. And I would even say, why to have a social climate fund when we have social cohesion? When even in the social climate fund, it clearly says we need to take specificities on the ground inbuilt. And that is our problem. If we create for each thing something without thinking in a coherent way, we multiply the problems for the future.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Peter, would you like to react?
Well, on which of the many points that Thomas made?
You can pick and choose.
No, but I mean, I think I mean, the first thing I would say is that we have been living through extraordinary circumstances over the past few years, over the last two to 3 years. You know, I think we've had 3 out of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in one way or another, and we've had to react very, very quickly. And when you have to react quickly, sometimes you have to compromise and work in ways which bring unexpected consequences. I think what is clear for the future is that there will be a rationalization of the EU budget and its instruments. But the question is in which direction? And I think that is the open question, because in a way which we have never seen before, we have a number of alternatives on the table. It's almost like a big laboratory. We have the European Court of Auditors looking at everything and drawing lessons, and we will have to digest all of this and try and do better. And I think the Commission is committed to doing that. I think the real question, which I just say a word on, is the question of, is cohesion something which needs to be at the center of all of this? And I think that something which we haven't mentioned today to a great extent is the political discontent that Europe is experiencing, and the geography of disaffection with Europe, whether it's Europe or national administrations, it's not very clear. But unless Europe is able to engage better, address the asymmetric impact, give the sense to people that they are not losers of the process of integration of the twin transitions, then we're going to be in trouble. And so I think there is a lot of work collectively on our table.
Thanks a lot. Maybe back to Ron, maybe for a final thought before I open the floor. So this last round was quite a bit on policies. In the paper, you draw some few policies. The first one is no one size fits all. I think it's coherent. Would you like to add on this also now, given what it was just mentioned about all the different policy instruments and the need for more coherence?
Well, I think when we talk about cohesion policy, I think what we should also focus attention on is, okay, what are the opportunities of lagging regions, right, of less developed regions, right? Because our report tend to show is indeed the twin transition might increase income disparities across regions in Europe. So it will make richer regions more rich and poor regions, well, I know not more poor, but at least they will lag behind. But we also see some positive signs in the sense that there are less developed regions that actually have opportunities to participate in the twin transition technologies. And you have to be following a one-size-fits-all policy, but you have to really target those in which each less developed region actually has potential to do so, and you have to activate that through policy. So I'm an optimist, and I see lots of potential there. I can actually see that less developed regions actually have a high potential in green technology. So actually they can contribute to the Green Deal, I would say, right? I'm not sure whether a lot of people actually are realizing that. So our graphs actually show is that the less developed regions might not have that much potential in most of the most complex digital technologies, but they have potential in moving in all kinds of new green technologies, right? And some of them are even quite complex. So I think that is what we should have in mind. And this is, I think, promising and could contribute to the green transition. Less developed regions can play a role in that respect. Also, when we look at to what extent less developed regions make connections, as I said before, relatively speaking, they do more so than the more developed regions. So actually, they actually understand that they have to connect to the outside world, which means moving across their own borders in order to exploit for complementarities. So in that sense, there's something to build on here and to expand on that. So in that sense, I think I'm pretty optimistic, but we really should target those specific potentials that they have, not just in general, but be very specific. And what our data actually show, and I think is doing quite a good job, is specifying what type of green technologies we are talking about and which regions can actually mean something and contribute to that process of greening our economies. And this, I think, is a very important lesson that we should take on board, not only in cohesion policy, but on green policy at the same time.
Thanks a lot. And with this, I would like to open the floor for questions. I see there are 2 questions there, Jorge.
Thank you, Patrick Bissieri from the National Bank of Belgium. Just 2 short questions. We have talked a lot about the opportunities for the less developed regions, but what about the transition regions, those that are more likely to be in development traps, if I take the cohesion policy point of view? And the second one is that when I had a quick look at the tables in the annex, I could find that some suggestions of cooperations were with the UK. So in the EU world, how do you realize that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Megan Richards. I'm a senior visiting fellow at the German Marshall Fund. I had a question. We talked about many, many funds and many actions. One thing that you didn't mention, and it's easy to avoid mentioning the huge list of activities, is the national energy and climate plans, which theoretically, again, now at EU level, these targets have to be met at EU level, not just at member state level, which requires regions to cooperate. And one of the elements of those plans is to encourage better coordination and cooperation between not just the member states, but the regions. And then, of course, the trans-European networks for energy and transportation, etc., should also theoretically help regions to work better together. Could you comment on whether you think those will help? Those are, of course, primarily green transition, but digitalization of the energy system is also a very important factor in that context.
Well, thanks a lot. My name is Wolfgang Eichert. I work in the financial sector, and my question is also from that perspective, because we've heard a lot about public money and public funding, which is certainly very important at the early stages of innovations. But when it comes down to bringing innovations to the market and really make it grow and scale up, it's more private money that is needed for these processes. So I don't want to open another discussion for now, so maybe if you could just allude on what you see as a major obstacle for private financing, and maybe even a further solution. Thanks.
perhaps I start with the transition regions question, the development trap, and you're entirely right. I mean, this is another one of the big policy questions for cohesion policy for the future. And I think there it goes even beyond the twin transitions, because we're looking at development traps and we're seeing that transition regions are particularly affected. That said, I think the work that has been presented today is as relevant for transition regions as it is for less developed regions. And I mean, as Ron said, I mean, even for more developed regions who want to improve, let's say, their efficiency. In relation to the question of the national energy and climate plans and trans-European networks, I mean, we work in cohesion policy very much in the framework. I mean, we have conditionalities and linked to this, and you see them very much as frameworks. The issue there, and this comes back a little bit to my point about other policies, is the granularity. Is their granularity? Oh, sorry, is their granularity, and that they tend to focus by their certainly in terms of the NECPs on the national level. Although some member states do go down a bit, and in the trans-European networks, I mean, have a bit of a tendency to be a bit point to point, as opposed to focusing on the places that they go through. Then perhaps just on the private sector, I fully agree with you, and this has been a key issue for us. We have within our programs financial instruments. And there, the challenge is really to mobilize equity in places which are either unattractive for the private sector or are low capacity. And I think that the capacity issue is an even more difficult one, because we're not talking about the public sector, we're talking about the private sector. So I fully agree, and I think this is another one of the policy questions which we have to further develop.
Thomas?
Yeah. Fully support what Peter said on transition regions. I think we also have to look at effective decentralization, because what we can see also, there is a link between, is there an effective decentralization in place in order to make the regions really flourish and work? With regard to the UK cooperation, we as a committee deeply regret that UK is not part of the Interreg family state in this. Only with the Northern Ireland peace program. Of course, now with involvement in Horizon, and Horizon going local or more place-based with the innovation policy, of course there are some opportunities. But when you look, for example, where are the experts coming from talking about cohesion, most of them come from the London School of Economics. And we are lacking really some think tanks more in the European Union dealing with this policy. And we are lacking this engagement with the British and with the American behind, because this is where we have joint challenges to work with. Concerning the instruments, a simple solution is if these instruments like 10T or the Climate Fund follow the same example, built on partnership and multi-level governance. Cohesion policy is the only policy where these principles are enshrined in the legal framework. We have in the RRF lip service to engagement of cities and regions. We have only cohesion policy where this is. And in the last negotiation, there were member states who were saying this is an administrative burden. We don't need partnership and multi-level governance. We don't need a code of conduct. Totally wrong. If we want local solutions, we need to trust the local level with all the pros and cons. They are not better politicians, better civil servants than other levels of government, but we have to build on them. And enshrining these principles of multi-level governance and partnership in the legal actions is very crucial. And on the financial services, one problem is, of course, also fragmentation. In a lot of these, and capacity also of the financial institution in lagging behind regions. There is no risk-taking mentality there, because they are locked in as well. And this is also a problem, getting the financial instruments playing. Luckily, cohesion policy has moved in this direction some time ago, but there is much more potential for the future.
Ron, would you like to add quickly?
Yeah, about the transition regions. I mean, we of course in the report there is focus on the transition regions. We made the distinction between the three types of regions: the more, the less developed, and the transition regions. What is striking, I think, and not unexpected, is that you see for the transition regions the most negative relationship between complexity and relatedness, meaning that in the transition regions they have the highest potential and the least complex activities, right? And this was even less so than less developed regions. Came a bit as a surprise to me, to be honest, but not unexpected. Also, referring to the work of Graber and Login and the development traps. I think also we need to know much more about development traps. So I think that also our work actually shows is that those transition regions are trapped in low complex activities and how to get out of that, right? So this is, I think, a very important issue that we need to take up, and it seems to be most problematic in that type of regions, given their old industrial past, things like that. They're already struggling for many decades to overcome that, but apparently they still do so to some extent right now. Yeah, the collaboration with the UK, I thought, I mean, it would be interesting to also look at to what extent there is a Brexit effect, right? So is it indeed the case that we would see less collaboration between UK regions and other European regions because of Brexit, right? I think there's a kind of self-reinforcing process in this kind of network linkages. So, so it might not immediately show up, but maybe in the long term it might go at the expense of collaborations between the UK and EU countries. Yes.
Thomas, you want to add?
I just wanted to say on transition regions, it's also important to see where they are. And for example, most of the French regions are transition regions. So you have to link it, what I meant with the issue of decentralization. What is the national framework in which these regions work as well? Why are most of the French regions underperforming in comparison to their potential? I think it's very important that this is also been picked up at European level. We cannot just simply say we pour money into it and then we don't challenge when there are systemic underperformance in that. We have the European semester, and we would need to look into the European semester also, what are you do with your territorial challenges? And by promoting this do no harm to cohesion, we have research on unfunded mandates where tasks are given but not funding, all these kind of things. I think that we need to have much more on radar if to make the policy really work. It's too much dependent on things which are not decided in Brussels, and we are talking too little about this, what needs to be changed at the member state level as well.
Thanks a lot. There are quite a lot of questions, but we are already over time. So I'm really sorry, but we will close the event. However, we still have some time, so you can stay, and I'm sure that you can ask the questions directly to the panelists. There will be some drinks and some food, so stay with us and we can continue the conversation. I would like to thank very much the panelists, the authors of the report. I think this is quite interesting and policy relevant. There are some copies available, otherwise you can find it on the website, and you can share it with your colleagues. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thank you.
We have started a consultation on the cohesion, future of cohesion. So if you you can still answer.
I did several times.
What do you expect from this?